You've connected to Cisco Unplugged.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cisco Unplugged. I'm Dan Klamert, your host. I'm back here with Al Dumdei. How are you doing today, Al?
Good, good. I'm excited. We've got a real Meraki veteran on the show today, so that'll be a lot of fun. So
Yes, agreed, agreed. Yeah, so like Al mentioned, in this week's episode 61, we're going to be going back to finish our part one from episode 57 on cloud best practices for wireless here. So we're welcoming back today here to the show Dave Scott. How's it going, Dave?
Good. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Al. Excited to be back. Thanks for having me again for part two.
Oh, thanks for
yeah,
coming
great.
back. Appreciate it. We didn't scare you away yet, so that's a good sign.
Yet.
Never.
So before we get rolling here, just a couple reminders. We do use Slido for questions. So if you do have questions today about best practices and whatnot, we can interject those as we go through here. So you'll see up on the screen, you can join the Slido there. Don't forget to input the passcode there. If you need that passcode, you can get it via the link below on our YouTube page. So you'll see the link to join the Slido on the right below the video on our YouTube page. And we'll be taking those questions live here today if you want to get those in. And like I mentioned on YouTube, we do record these sessions. This is out there on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@getunplugged. So when you go out there, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Click the bell so you are notified when we do go live with other great content here on the channel. So thanks for tuning in.
This
With
is like
that,
episode 60.
61. Yeah,
This
61.
is like episode 61, isn't it, Dan?
It is.
This-
It is.
So,
Yep.
plus, there's a bunch of other videos in there.
Yeah,
So
there were some supplemental ones, right? Like last
Yeah.
week there was a back to school summer special, so it was
Yeah, we didn't count
unnumbered.
that one. We didn't count that one. So that's this is the episode 61 of the recurring kind of format of every other week, but there is a lot of stuff. I think there's over 100 videos out there now.
Man, there's
Nice.
a lot of content. Yeah.
Yeah.
So hopefully,
Yeah, I think Dave
listeners
Dave was
will be
going
able
to
to
talk
see
a little
that.
bit about some of this stuff like during the session, he's going to reference some other stuff, other past episodes as well. But Dave, why don't you remind us a little bit what we discussed or what we covered back in episode 57 or part one?
Sure. Yeah, that'd be a great way to kick it off.
Yeah.
In episode 57, which was part one of cloud managed wireless best practices,
Mhm.
we spent some time talking about how a Meraki dashboard organization is a collection of networks where each network is essentially a configuration container. And
It's coming back to me now. It's coming back.
Yeah, it's specific to a physical location, right? Which could be a single building or an entire campus, and how the cloud managed nodes just become instances of that configuration at the network level with regards to the firmware and the config file they end up running.
Mhm.
We went through some of the org-wide features of the dashboard, a little bit higher level, some best practices related to inventory management, firmware management. We looked at change logs and change control. And we took a look at licensing and also how we manage org-wide versus network-wide admins, and also some organization-wide security settings. I think we talked a little about some network-wide settings like maps and floor plans, traffic analytics. We talked about group policies. We also took a peek at summary reporting. I remember showing a summary report.
That's right.
And then to round out that episode, we took a look at some higher level cloud managed features and best practices, like the configuration and use of the AP Flex table, the way we use AP tags for SSID availability mechanisms, a little bit on SSID creation, access control. We took a look at things like AP health, connection timelines, performance metrics. I think we jumped into that. We looked at the connectivity widgets. Roaming analytics was part of it. And I think we also showed off the firewall and traffic shaping page as that one-stop shop and some of the best practices related to that. We were about to touch on some basic guest networking and splash page options when we came up against the clock.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe we pick up where we left off, just so episode 61 is just kind of a continuation of 57.
Yeah, that'd be great. So lots of great stuff we hit on in 57. So if you haven't seen that or want to go back and check it out, I encourage you to do that. Thanks, Dave.
Sure. The Meraki dashboard does have a basic splash page configuration mechanism built in, which allows you to select from different themes or create your own. You choose here between modern, fluid, copy of modern, and you have options of customizing both the welcome messages and the consent messages, and whether or not that consent message is going to appear, which would require the user to check a box before being able to click through. And you can also allow them through to the original URL or specify a URL they'll be redirected to. You can also select from almost 24 languages, and you also have a splash frequency that can range anywhere from every 30 minutes to every 90 days. You do, in fact, have the ability to edit the HTML right here in the dashboard. If you'd like to modify something or preview it, I can click on this little pencil right here to edit the theme. It'll bring me into the HTML editor. And I can preview the page. I can click on the continue file here, for example, and I can preview it. I can, go back to the config. I can modify things simply by clicking the edit button here and actually modify the HTML code. Not that it's a best practice necessarily, but the reason I show this is that there's a cool little pro tip, buried in here where I've had some K-12 customers who've used this in their schools. They only wanted a predefined list of school-owned MAC addresses to get onto a particular SSID. So we configure a group policy, and we looked at those back in episode 57. We configure a group policy for those devices to bypass the splash page. That way, any devices that did not bypass the splash would be presented with a splash page, and we simply deleted this line of HTML code to take away the continue button. So they end up gated at the AP and can't get beyond the splash page. They can't get on the network, but they could have a useful page of information about how to contact the help desk if they actually are coming from an authorized device that maybe slipped through the cracks and hadn't been allowed through yet. So there are some cool and interesting things that you can do within the splash page generation as well. Now, since we're on that topic of guest access, and I think there was a question that came in on this during the previous episode, but we were short on time. There is a best practice in general for guest access, especially in high density and ultra high density environments like stadiums and exhibit halls. And that best practice is to make it easy and as simple as possible to get on the guest Wi-Fi. So we need to mention what we call client-induced interference here, which is an often overlooked source of RF degradation. Simply stated, the most detrimental devices in a high-density deployment are not the ones actively using the network, but it's the unassociated devices. And we can make some assumptions like 90% of people will have a smartphone, maybe 90% of those will actually have Wi-Fi enabled. They're not necessarily associated to any of your SSIDs, but they have Wi-Fi turned on, and it's the aggressive probing activity of the non-connected clients that degrade the airtime efficiency and increase the channel contention and can actually be the biggest source of interference.
Yeah, so we see this phenomenon a lot, right, in large venues, stadiums, auditoriums, that sort of thing, right, Dave? And, how do we mitigate that? And I think that's also a detriment to the client, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. The client, the more I'm probing, the more my battery is going to drain. And it's kind of a win-win here if we can get them on the Wi-Fi.
Exactly. It's a win-win if you can get them on and if you have a good take rate. Let's just consider 2.4 gigahertz to keep it simple. And since that's what's been around the longest. If you look at a spectrograph, we'll typically see lots of activity on the best practice channels of 1.6.11. But there's a lot of other traffic in between, even on the other channels, which is all probe related, as unassociated clients just walk the band sequentially, sending unsolicited probe requests to understand what Wi-Fi networks are within range and if they see an SSID for which they should auto reconnect to. And what happens? Lots of frames on overlapping channels, driving the noise floor higher, making it worse. Getting those devices on the network can help tremendously because the probe frequency diminishes significantly on an associated device. And Now, this is not just specific to cloud managed wireless, but also on-prem. The solution and the best practice is proven. Make it easy for guests to associate. Maximizing the spectrum in a high density environment, in this sense, making it easy to get on the network, because that ease of use directly impacts the figure of merit, which is airtime efficiency or the duty cycle of a given channel. The fewer users that connect, the more aggressive the probe activity and the client-induced interference you're going to have. A higher noise floor, which means lower SNR for all the clients, who then connect at lower MCS rates. So overall, unhealthy airspace. A device on the network is far less damaging than a device off the network.
And we're not calling out any specific clients here. This is really much, pretty much most clients, right? And so a client that's connected to Wi-Fi, just in general, it's happier. It's less probing. You're going to save more battery, and there's going to be less overall client interference.
Yeah, we see probe rates can be once, if you're on, could be every 10 minutes, right? I mean, it can be a long time between probes if you're connected, whereas if you're not connected, it's constant, right?
Yeah,
it is constant. I remember some testing from, this goes back a really long time ago. This is probably over 10 years ago. Had some experience testing this, and this was exhibited across iPhones, Android phones, various different vendors, various different device types, tablets, phones, etc. And we found that on average, it sent devices were sending 4 probe requests per learned network per channel every 5 to 6 seconds across all 2.4 gigahertz channels 1 through 11. When it was associated to an SSID, there were very few probe requests for any network on any channel. So almost no client-induced interference at all. Now, if it's unassociated, you multiply that out by hundreds or thousands of devices, and it gets pretty ugly pretty quick. Now, there can be a little bit of a conflict here, right? Because the resulting RF design factors may not exactly align with corporate security policy. Guest Wi-Fi in particular, it really needs to be frictionless. So complex captive portals, fancy splash pages, or any kind of a multi-step onboarding workflow might make the security team happy, or it might satisfy compliance checkboxes, but it has a direct negative impact on RF health and spectrum efficiency. So it's always a challenge. We need to find a healthy middle ground. Now, with the introduction of 6 gigahertz, there's an even stronger case for band segmentation by role. So not sure if I'm going to ruffle any feathers here. And I'm not going to claim that this is a best practice, but let's say perhaps it's becoming a common practice. The 6 gigahertz band, leave that reserved for your production and your mission critical SSIDs, where the client capabilities, the traffic behavior, the security posture is all well understood. Guest clients, often unknown, unmanaged, prone to unpredictable usage patterns, etc., are better served on 2.4 and 5. This helps protect that pristine 6 gigahertz spectrum from non-essential traffic or from guest traffic. It's really going to help ensure a more maximizing performance for the key applications, simplifies roaming and policy enforcement. So in short, what we're tending to see is that 6 gigahertz tends to be reserved for your most important, production and mission critical uses. And in those 2.4 and 5 gigahertz bands in ultra high density, even shaving 2 or 3% of airtime overhead can really give significant throughput and latency improvements.
Yeah, we got a comment here that came in. I also want to ask a question, I guess, too, of maybe Dave and Al for your thoughts. Is the comments around I killed 2.4 gigahertz due to poor signal overlap years ago, and it was the best decision to keep on 5 gigahertz because it works so much better. I guess my question is, when does 5 gigahertz become the new 2.4 gigahertz? And, as we're moving to 6 gigahertz here, 5 is, used to be pretty, I guess, clean, but things are getting more and more populated and busier there. So just to kind of getting your take on that, thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I'm going to present sort of a slightly different perspective, I think.
Okay, sure.
So when you think of 5 and 6 gigahertz, forget about 2.4. That's why I said yay when they said this. Like,
exactly.
Turn it up.
Congratulations.
Now, it's there for IoT. It's there for special applications and that kind of stuff. But from a guest, we're talking specifically around guest and maybe operational. Remember, the 5 gigahertz is still the primary band. Now, if you've got, so in David's case where he was mentioning 6 gigahertz is the operational, if you've got like owned devices, corporate owned devices, and you can be sure they're only on 6 gigahertz, that's fine. But for a lot of cases, devices, still the majority of the devices, at least 2/3 of the devices are on 5 gigahertz. But anything that I can get off of 5 gigahertz and onto 6 gigahertz makes 5 gigahertz better for the clients that are on 5 gigahertz. So getting clients to 6 gigahertz to me is kind of that double whammy. One, they're getting a better experience because they're going to wider bands, bigger channels, better throughput, cleaner spectrum, and they're cleaning up the old spectrum when they leave, right? And so it's making it better for those that are still there. So I'm a big advocate of moving everybody onto the 6 gig. Now, again, there are, as David pointed out, there are different operational aspects of that. If you own the devices and you've got this channel separated and all that kind of stuff, that's fine. But I think in general, remember, moving clients to 6 is the double whammy, right? You're also improving the experience at 5. So I totally agree with the 2.4 comment from the listener.
Definitely agree. One of the other things we wanted to get into today was, I don't think we started to cover this last time, was radio settings and RF profiles. This is found in the Meraki dashboard under the wireless configure radio settings page, which I already had preloaded here. This is the initial page that you come to. This is the overview page. What might look new to you is this new RF health score concept that you get with AI RRM. So in addition to your AP summary box, you'll have an RF performance and an RF coverage widgets that can give you a quick glance into RF health, co-channel interference issues, connectivity problems, and if AI RRM has been busy or maybe not so busy, changing channels to mitigate performance issues. Below that, you see the same useful flex table of every radio and every AP, which you can easily filter or sort or narrow it down based on your AP tags or on the band or on the channel. You can leverage all of those, and you can also see what regulatory domain you're in. You can see what channel they're on, their transmit power. Also see if channel and power were assigned automatically by Auto RF or AI RRM, or assigned statically. So I can simply hover over these. I see these are all auto assigned. If I wanted to change that, I could simply click on this for this one AP and for that one radio. I could simply change its channel or set something manually, or same for transmit power. I could turn the radio off, leave it at auto, or I could say I'm going to do a manual and I want this particular radio to be at a specific transmit power. So you can change all of that here, but you can also adjust this right in the RF profiles page. So let's take a look at that. Go ahead.
Quick question on this. So these, like the scores, I saw some at like 75. What is your take on how to read these scores? How do at what point do I need to start doing something about it?
Yeah, higher is better, of course, and there is some documentation, so I can sort and reverse sort, and it will tend to give you these warnings, right? So I'll see I have a sort of an alert and something that's absolutely not good. So I can click into that, and I get an idea, right? Dashboard will try to provide you with a little bit of context as to why, and in this case, co-channel interference. I have a neighbor, my neighbor score is very poor, and I can go and I can look at the AP neighbors page for that one particular access point. These also can provide some clickable widgets when you're looking at the individual APs, so I can kind of get an idea of what's going on at the AP level and see how that, and hold that up to the light and see how that AP compares to all the other APs and look at it at a network-wide level. That's the stuff. I think we looked at some of that last time when we looked at this health tab down here. So I'll refer back to episode 57 on that. But generally speaking, it's the lower 25 to 30% is where it's an absolute problem. In that 35 to maybe 55, 60% range, you're going to have this alerting state. And everything beyond that is pretty much going to be a green checkbox. Now, it's not exactly, we can get more granular than that, but that's how the dashboard is sort of breaking it down here for when it really needs to call something to your attention.
Got it. So we don't have to panic if we have a 60 or something like that in here. This is not, okay.
Yeah, not necessarily. On the actual RF profiles tab, if we click on this middle tab, and I think I had that right here, the RF profiles, you can create new profiles. I think we might have taken a quick peek at this last time, where there are some predefined profiles that you can select from and customize, or you can create from scratch. And if we click into one of these, an optimized profile, you can give it a name. You can choose which bands you want enabled, and you can do that across all the SSIDs right here, or on a per SSID basis right here, and decide if you also want band steering enabled. If you have APs with XOR radios, then you will also have a section where you can determine how that flex radio will operate. And for APs with that capability, if you want 2, 3, or 4 radio operation. So for example, the 9178 has 4 client serving radios, and I can choose if I just want to have 3 radios with 2.4, 5, and 6, or actually use all 4 radios, which will allow me to have 2.4 dual 5 gigahertz and 6 gigahertz fixed, because there's that extra client serving radio in 9178. So you have some pretty good flexibility with how you're going to configure that. You can choose if you want client balancing enabled or disabled, as well as if you want Wi-Fi 7 features enabled or disabled if you're still in a transitional period and not leveraging the 11BE features yet. This is new. You may be aware at Cisco Live, we announced the 9179F access point for the high density with adjustable antenna beam widths, etc. So if you have a 9179 deployed, you'll also get this to determine, how do you want your antenna configured. And then you have individual settings on a per radio basis, where you can change the list of channels that are available, adjust the transmit power range, adjust the minimum bit rates. There are some industry standard best practices, well known. We don't need to dive into here, but just for completeness, you'll see things like disabling at least the lowest 2 bit rates, and or a minimum of 12 or 18 megabits per second minimum bit rate. Typically dialing down the maximum transmit power from 30 dBm, right? We don't need 1 full watt of radio power, down to the low 20s, and typically with a 3 to 4 dB offset between 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. In this case, on 2.4, I see I might have from 3 to 17 dBm. On 5 gigahertz, we're 5 to 21 dBm. And on 6 gigahertz, we are 8. They have it all the way at 30. I would probably be more tempted to say, let's bring this down to 23 or 24, because no client is ever going to be able to match, right? We can end up with a bit of a mismatch there. And 24 minimum bit rate on 6 gigahertz. And yeah, actually we went all the way to 36 on 2.4, but they may have done this for a reason. This is in Meraki HQ, and there's a super high density of access points throughout that building. So I'm not surprised necessarily to see a 36 meg minimum bit rate, but best in common practice, you start out at 12 or 18 and you go from there, and you make incremental adjustments slowly over time, give it a couple days to settle, and see what the overall health is looking like. We made a quick mention of this last week in our summer break episode, when a lot of schools are starting their summer deployments and upgrades, and the best practices of keeping the transmit power between 6 to 9 dBm maximum difference between the bands themselves, just to maintain a healthy balance, so you don't end up with a disproportionate number of clients on one radio versus another, when you have 5+6 or dual 5+6. So, just to keep in mind, there are different characteristics across the bands, of course, when it comes to effective range. So it's normal to see that 3 to 5 dBm transmit power difference especially between 2.4 and the 5.6 bands. The other point there is about channel width. And again, this is not specific to cloud managed Wi-Fi, but also on-prem. There are times when you may want to manually set channel width, typically 20 or 40 megahertz in 5 gig and 80 megahertz in 6 gig. That's why we say 80 is the new 20 and 6 gigahertz. The reason why we might gravitate away from auto and manually setting the channel width is becoming more of a common practice, because when we leave it to auto, RRM tends to prioritize wider channels, which can result in some inconsistencies in your channel plan. And likewise, more modern client devices are going to prioritize wider channels, which can result in more sticky client issues than you might expect. So, and in 6 gigahertz, RRM with wider channels is going to tend to be biased towards the primary scanning channels. So just a quick mention of that as well. Now, there's also, where was the setting for, here, RxSOP. See how it's kind of hidden off here over on the side? So there's a reason for that, right? So here's that RxSOP. I have to click on that link. And so the best and common practice is to not touch it. I'll just say the common practice, right? That's why we kind of semi-hide it behind that link in the Meraki dashboard with a warning that you should only use this in an already finely tuned network. RxSOP is the equivalent. We always say it's the equivalent of putting earmuffs on the AP to bump the decode threshold just a little bit higher. Most customers don't tend to touch this and probably don't need to. But for the 5 or 10% who do, we're going to say proceed. RxSOP sets the default to negative 95. So if I enable that, I think neg 95 is going to be the default. And if you do want to increase that into the negative 80s, the best practice there is to do that typically in maybe 3 to a maximum of 5 or 6 dB increments at a time. Let things settle for a day or two of observations. A common target for RxSOP in more crowded environments is negative 82. So ultimately, the APs will be able to transmit more often instead of backing off, which can make a big difference, especially in dense environments.
So correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think it's been a little while since we've talked about RxSOP on the show, but essentially that threshold that's a cutoff effectively where the AP is going to treat anything below that threshold as noise, and it's not going to wait, right?
Ignores
it's not going to wait for that. It's just going to go on with its merry way. So that's where it gets dangerous. If you tweak that threshold too much, basically you can create a drop off where clients are essentially treated as noise, and it's not decoding that Wi-Fi traffic, right?
Yeah, exactly right. And it's actually very easy to test. If you want to even just test this at home, you can adjust this on a particular AP or a particular band. I've done this myself in the home lab, where I tuned it too high on purpose, and I've just loaded a YouTube video on the phone, and by the time I walked across to the other side of the room, it immediately started clipping and eventually just dropped off.
Yeah. Okay.
I like to think of it like squelch. If you remember, Dan, you probably remember this, the old CB radios, right? And so I grew up on a farm effectively, right? And so that's how you got the call for lunch, right? Was the CB radio, and the squelch knob, you'd kind of, if you didn't set it right, you'd hear constant noise, right? And so it was constantly annoying, and you'd set that squelch where you just don't hear that noise anymore. But if you set it too high, you didn't also hear the call for lunch, right?
Right.
Right. And so that's exactly the way SOP operates, is you want to set that just above the noise, but not above the signals that you want to hear, right? And that way you're not, to David's point, you're not backing off based on all this noisy stuff that you don't care about, but also you're not acting on your own signals. You're not ignoring your own signals that you want to hear. Yeah,
that's why I really like that earmuff analogy, and I stole that probably either from Fred or maybe from Jim Florwick in the past with the earmuff analogy. I did want to spend a minute talking about client balancing because this is the 802.11v stuff, and in the Cisco Meraki dashboard, there's been different answers to this at different times. Passive client balancing was introduced way back in R25 firmware, and then dynamic in R29 firmware. It's still based on RSSI and AP load factors, but prior to R29 firmware, we did client balancing passively at association time. Starting with R29, that was enhanced from passive to active. So in pretty much every firmware version since R25, one of the first things that the AP does is it sends back an association status code 17 to a non-11V client at association time. And that is basically a rejection sent by the AP telling the station it can't handle any more clients, when in fact it likely could, but our client balancing algorithm may have determined there's a better AP, and code 17 would then prompt a non-11V client to try to associate elsewhere. Also in all firmware, not just R29 and newer, we do have the ability to do 11V BSS transition management frames at association time that allows the AP and the station to exchange tables and try to make the best decision on which AP to balance that 11V capable client to. The APs communicate amongst themselves. They actually get broken up into resource groups. This is more of a Meraki thing. They get broken up into resource groups. They need 30 dB or better SNR to be considered to be in the same resource group. And they exchange encrypted broadcasts. It's actually, you can look for the traffic. It's on UDP 61.111, so long as they are on the same management VLAN. And the message basically consists of, here's all the clients that I see. These are the ones that are associated to me. This is my load factor. And then that data all gets fed into the algorithm to make roaming decisions for clients that support 11V.
And so what is the recommendation on that now? Is it, because you said it's changed.
It's changed over time, right?
Yeah.
So are we now on?
Yeah, it used to be on by default. Now, when you configure a new Meraki dashboard network, it's off by default. So what's going on there? Starting in R29, we also track the 11V activity. We can send the BSS TM frames post association. So we do have a more dynamic way of balancing load, even when clients aren't necessarily roaming. Now, a side benefit is that also avoids force disassociating a client for some reason, since some clients don't respond well to disassociation. And they can actually blocklist the AP that shunned them. And then that can prevent a roam back when a roam back would actually be a good thing. So in terms of, the current modern, like, let's say best practices, in my humble opinion, client balancing and 11V historically have created as many problems as they have solved. It's a tricky thing. A lot depends on the clients. And so it can vary dramatically based on the device manufacturer, Apple versus Samsung versus whatever. The device type, is it a MacBook, an iPhone, an Android phone, a tablet, depending on OS version, and even different driver versions on the same device. So sometimes that's my subtle way of telling customers, leave client balancing off. And that has become the default anyway. It sounds like client balancing could only be a great thing, right? But like I said, we've seen it cause issues as well as solve them, depending on the mix of clients. That's the biggest variable. And now
I've seen this in other institutions where the clients get very aggressive, right? And so you say, hey, you can't join this AP. They're like, okay, I want to join that AP. It's like, you can't join it. Okay, I want to join that AP. And they just keep hammering that AP over. And to your point of sort of like we're talking about probe requests and all this noise it generates in the environment, it's a great way to generate a lot of superfluous.
It seems like you're one, and I'm not going to call it any specific clients, but you're one client driver update away from a scenario like you just said, Al, where there's maybe panic roaming or, people make mistakes, and there can be bugs in code, right? Not that we know anything about that, but
drivers are written by people, and people make mistakes.
not throwing stones at the client side, but that ultimately they're deciding the roaming, right? And when to roam. So I mean, that's just something to consider, I guess.
Now to Al's point, we have thought of that. So there is a stipulation that an AP can only attempt to load balance a client or reject an association, I think 2 times. And that applies to both passive and active client balancing. If we're talking about passive and a client attempts association a 3rd time, or if we're talking active and a client refuses to reassociate after 2 attempts, either way, the AP caves and the client is marked as persistent.
Got it.
Because, let's face it, some clients and drivers are that stubborn. Right. So that way we have it built into the algorithm. We can kind of try to avoid that endless cat and mouse game.
So we do actually have a question too on this client band. They're calling it band select, but I don't understand why band select would cause problems with voice. Can you help me understand this better?
We might come back to that. Let's can we leave that one in the parking lot for now, Al.
Okay.
Wanted to finish the thought on just in terms of kind of what we're recommending to customers.
Okay, sure.
And the recommendation there, and again, not that it's best practice, is that if you're starting with a new deployment and you see that it's off by default, fine, leave it alone. But if you do want to turn it on, do it in a controlled way after you have a solid baseline and you can observe the subsequent impact for better or for worse in a methodical way. And without any other config changes during that time, right? We want to minimize any other config changes. If client balancing is already on, and maybe it has been forever, but you've been logging cases with odd disconnects or bad roaming behavior, then I would consider turning client balancing off as a solid troubleshooting step. There too, make that the only change, observe it over a few days or a week, so that you can take note of the differences. The bottom line, it is still a tricky thing, client balancing on versus off. But except now I think, I don't remember what firmware it started with, the default is off. The other thing we alluded to last time in episode 57 was the AI RRM piece of it. Yeah. So I wanted to jump from RF profiles to AI RRM. Now we have entire Unplugged episodes on AI RRM, so won't go into those details here today. But only say that for cloud managed wireless in the Meraki dashboard with the MR advanced or advantage level of licensing, you get AI RRM in addition to other features like we showed last time, intelligent proactive packet capture that we looked at. Now, I wasn't even going to go into prezo mode here, but I just had a couple slides. I'm going to just jump over to a couple slides real quick. Obviously, one goal of AI-powered auto RF or AI RRM is a more autonomous network. We want to reduce channel changes because there are typically more channel changes in response to certain stimuli that can potentially be avoided or managed more effectively. So we're now keeping a historical reference of channel changes on a per channel, per AP basis. And we're using that to automate RF profile settings and avoid problematic channels. Maybe because a DFS hits in 5 gigahertz, for example. We simply call this channel avoidance, and each AP can maintain a channel avoid list. And that list is dynamic, and each channel can be actually assigned to a penalty box and then subsequently monitored and either kept there or returned to the available channel list. And there's multiple stages that it can pass through. Now, these events don't typically affect the entire network, but only a portion of it. So this is all happening dynamically on each AP independently. You can even download a CSV file of every AP's avoid and monitor channel list. So it's not just a black box. Another goal, the middle one there, is to minimize any form of connectivity disruptions to the clients during the busiest hours of the workday, because a cascade of channel changes and a high density deployment in the middle of a busy hour is not something that wireless admins want to have to triage and troubleshoot. So we call it intelligent busy hour. You can set it manually to disallow channel changes during a specific time window each day with a single checkbox. This can be AI driven and based on client count, network load, and handled automatically for you. We ran this in some of our own buildings back during beta testing in San Jose, and the result was a pretty dramatic improvement in the overall stability of the network. And then finally on this slide, an additional goal was to restore RF parameters to their previous settings after a period of sleep. A lot of customers have sustainability goals. They might use port schedules to power down all or maybe a portion of their APs overnight, for example. And we have the ability to allow the APs to come back up to 7 days later with their previous RF parameters, so they don't have to cycle through the RRM algorithm from scratch and then take longer to settle down, but instead go right back to their last known good settings. And that also applies after a wake up from a busy hour enforcement.
That's kind of how I felt after Cisco Live. I came home Thursday night and then I woke up set to original parameters on Friday morning like a new man. It was a long week.
Yeah, exactly.
Great example.
So this next slide is just to say that so Meraki's traditional auto RF evolved and came into the fold of Cisco's greater AI RRM strategy. And there were some dramatic improvements. One significant difference is that instead of auto RF making decisions based on 15 to 20-minute lookbacks to determine optimal channel and power, the trend-based RRM looks back and baselines the last couple of weeks of data. So we have a much more sophisticated RRM solution here. The example I always use is in K-12, where students can change classes multiple times per day. And now AI RRM knows to expect that. And the end result of all that movement will leave the client landscape looking very much like it did before the movement started when the bell rang. And it knows to avoid the unnecessary ripple effect of channel and power changes from 1 hour to the next, and even from one day to the next. We also have dynamic FRA, the flexible radio assignment. A very common best practice for a long time in many deployments was to have every other 2.4 gigahertz radio manually disabled. In that K-12 example, for example, it might be every other classroom as you proceed down a long hallway of classrooms. And while that tended to work somewhat well, it's static, it's suboptimal. With flexible radio assignment, and in this case, a single toggle switch, we let AI RRM do the heavy lifting. And it'll self-optimize the 2.4 gigahertz deployment and disable the appropriate 2.4 gig radios automatically and dynamically. And the last piece of it for now is an enhanced auto busy hour, which is the same as that regular busy hour I described, except we delay the channel changes until after the busy hour time period. So rather than just suppressing channel changes during the busy hour, after the busy hour window has passed, we can make the appropriate optimizations using the busy hour conditions from hours before, during the actual busy hour, when it actually mattered. So we can make those changes after the busy hour, but using the actual busy hour data. And then the question is, well, does all this actually work? So I have two quick slides here. These are some actual real world results of the wireless AIOps in action. This goes back to early 2023 when we started doing our own internal testing. And in this case, the customer had almost 300 APs across a couple dozen buildings and about 1,500 clients daily on average. The interference decreased from 5% down to 1% due to trend-based optimizations the AI was able to pick up on. And likewise, the RRM performance score improved from 65 all the way to 95, simply due to the AI-enhanced checkbox for channel planning. End result was obviously a more stable wireless deployment and happier users. You may have seen these slides before. I think they were part of a Cisco Live presentation. This last slide here, specific to client roaming, it's pretty easy to pick out the effects of AI channel planning and auto busy hour. The dark blue black line is the client count, which stayed relatively consistent across the months of May and June. But now look at the yellow line. Before this was enabled on June 3rd, much higher roam times throughout the month of May were reduced by 50%. and came down an average of 100 milliseconds. And anyone who's done, voice over Wi-Fi design knows that's kind of one of the magic numbers to avoid voice quality issues. And sure enough, this beta customer's users reported better call quality from the day this was enabled. It was one of those rare times when someone calls and says, "Hey, what did you do? Things are better." Instead of "what happened, things are so much worse." Let's see, we're back over here. We did want to spend a few minutes talking about Air Marshal before we close out this episode. So let's just spend a few minutes on this. Air Marshal is Cisco Meraki's WIDs and WIPs that's integrated directly into the APs to provide real-time monitoring and mitigation of wireless threats. So you can detect and respond to rogue SSIDs, spoofed APs, the other common forms of unauthorized or malicious wireless activities like the broadcast and the packet floods. Air Marshal operations are carried out on a dedicated dual or tri-band scanning radio for security scanning, the same one that's used for all the spectrum analysis that we talked about in episode 57. It allows them to continuously scan the bands for threats with no impact to the client serving radios. So you'll see that you have an option here. Neither one is necessarily best practice, one versus the other, but you have option to block clients from connecting to rogue SSIDs. The default is to allow it. It depends on your deployment. So the default allows it, and you can specify a rogue containment list, or you can automatically block clients from rogue SSIDs and then configure an allow list. While that second option sounds good, especially if it's 100% cloud managed Meraki deployment, there are corner cases where there can be some issues. So it's more common to stick with the allow plus block list versus block plus allow list. What's nice is it gives you a single place in the dashboard to show a centralized view of the detected threats, the affected clients, the current containment status. So if we take a peek at, I just clicked over to the rogue SSID one, and whether things are partially contained, or manually, I can manually contain something. In this case, here's something that's uncontained. Maybe I know that does need to be contained. I simply check the box, click the edit button, and I want to configure an alert, or I want to go ahead and contain it. Now, a common question that comes up there is, what's the best practice, right? Or how is it actually, doing the identification and the containment? And so it starts with identification. Rogue detection is actually comparing the BSSID seen by a scanning AP or any AP's dedicated scanning radio to the Ethernet MACs that are seen by that same AP on the LAN side. The BSSID will not likely be an exact match of an Ethernet MAC seen on the LAN. So we also compare the third and fourth bytes because they should match. If the third and fourth bytes of the BSSID match any LAN entries, and if there's, I think, less than 5 bits of difference between the addresses at a binary level, it gets flagged as a rogue. The Air Marshal is going to automatically identify those rogue APs, and you can configure policies to contain those threats, in which case the AP will also use the dedicated scanning radio to send the deauth frames to those clients attempting to connect to the rogue APs. So basically that prevents client association, so they can remain connected only to your trusted APs within that same dashboard network. Because remember, a deauth frame, it's not a request, it's a directive. So while containment is a powerful tool, best practice, use it carefully, use it judiciously, because of the potential interference with neighboring networks or impacting legitimate environments. It is essential to understand the compliance implications and the legal implications of active containment, especially in certain regulated industries or regions. So
what's the best practice overall on this, right? So, I see I have rogue APs. I mean, what does that do for me? I mean, why would I care? Honestly, right?
Overall best practice is not to simply leverage Air Marshal in cloud managed deployments, but also Cisco recommends a layered approach. to wireless security, where Air Marshal is used along features like WPA3, .1x authentication, VLAN segmentation. There's layer 2 client isolation, which you can optionally, we looked at that last time, you can enable that on a bridge mode SSID. Or if you select an SSID for NAT mode, then they're automatically layer 2 isolated. And so this is not specific to cloud managed, but on-prem as well. When it comes to WIPs and rogues, best and common practice, have a written policy, have a planned procedure on how you react in general. Check with your legal team, make sure you're not doing that auto containment. And finally, I'll mention that the Air Marshal info and policy configuration, this can also be configured programmatically via the API. That was not always the case. I think that came a little over a year ago. So just wanted to make the audience aware that in case you were waiting, if you're heavy into automation and if you were waiting to leverage the automation aspects of dashboard specific to Air Marshal in the Meraki dashboard, that is available now via API.
Good. Okay, yeah, that's kind of what I was alluding to. I was glad to hear you say that about the written policy, because I think that, to me, that's where we fall down so often on this is, okay, I have all this information, so there's a rogue. What do I do? Well, I might want to run out there and go to unplug it. Do I have a written policy to do so? No, right? I mean, it's like, if you don't have a written policy, turn it off, because it's just going to make you stay up at night, right?
Yep.
If you have a written policy, great. Then you've got something you can execute around it.
Yeah. Then you also have, kind of the backing as the IT or network administrator. You're not playing God yourself, right? You're not making those decisions. You're backed with a policy that is, in writing.
Yeah, important to have a written policy. Part of the corporate security policy is key there. But yeah, never just turn on that auto containment, by default.
Especially.
Yeah. And do we still have
your
a couple
legal
minutes?
department first.
Yeah, exactly.
We have a couple minutes for one last thing.
We do.
Dan?
Yeah.
Okay, great. One thing I think I alluded to in episode 57 was the local status page.
Yes.
And I just wanted to show an example of that here. We didn't actually show it off, but I think we did make a mention of the local status page. Take a quick look at that. It's not terribly exciting, but it can be very useful, and it is often overlooked. As long as you are associated to any SSID on a Meraki AP, you can point a browser to ap.meraki.com, or sometimes it's my.meraki.com. And the AP will intercept that and serve you up this local status page. Now, you can disable this function if desired on the network-wide general page, but 95% of the time, it's left enabled in most deployments. In this case, I did this in a separate incognito browser because I'm looking at the live local status page from my own laptop that I'm presenting from today, and the 9178 AP that I'm associated to. On this default connections tab, I have my client connectivity vitals up top, along with AP info further below. I also have a speed test button here in the middle that I can actually run live right now. And in fact, we see the traffic spiking on 5 gigahertz channel 140 while I'm actively running that speed test. So just with this page alone, I can connect to the local status page. I can walk around and do my own little mini site survey walkthrough using this local status page, and perhaps along with some other external, speed test websites, for example. I also have the neighbors tab where I can see a handy table of all the known Meraki peers in the same Meraki dashboard network, reverse sorted by signal strength, as well as all the other neighbors along with their BSSID, channel, crypto levels, et cetera. Again, reverse sorted by their signal strengths. I can see which ones are the closest. And then there's also a configure tab. I went into this earlier. Now, this will typically prompt you for credentials, for your login credentials, since you could conceivably make config changes here. So you'll be prompted for admin credentials. This page can be useful if you want to force an AP into site survey mode, if you need to prime an IP with static, prime an AP with static IP config, if you want to manually set channel and power for specific radios. And at the bottom, there's a download button, which downloads and stores the equivalent of a show tech command. So even if the AP is offline and not online in the Meraki dashboard, you can connect to the local status page, download a show tech, and then sneaker net that over and upload it to Meraki support if you need to during a trouble ticket. So where I alluded a couple times to where you configure this. On the network-wide general page, this is where you configure your local credentials, and you can optionally turn on or turn off local device status pages as well as remote device status pages to be able to access it via the management LAN IP for those access points. This is network-wide, so this is one place you would configure this, and it would also apply to things like switches or MX security appliances. And then the other thing on this page that we alluded to last time, but maybe didn't show off, was this meshing, right? Meshing is enabled or disabled. And there are some pros and cons to both. Remember that all Meraki APs have the ability to automatically mesh to one another should they not have wired connectivity. So where this sometimes happens, for example, is maybe on a trunk port where there's a native VLAN mismatch and that AP cannot communicate with the wired LAN. However, it's plugged in, it's powered up, it's on PoE. That AP can transition to mesh mode. It can mesh backhaul to another nearby AP within range and then still actively serve clients. And also, by the way, send an alert to say, hey, I've transitioned over to repeater mode. I have a wired connection. I'm online, still serving clients, but I'm in mesh mode and maybe I shouldn't be. And then you can go investigate. Now, on the flip side, again, it's not necessarily a best practice, but it comes down more to administrative preference, is to simply disable meshing. If every one of my APs in my deployment is wired and I don't want to have mesh and I don't need mesh, don't want mesh, disable it. It's one less thing running on the APs, and you have the option of disabling mesh if you know that it doesn't, if you know that you don't have it or don't want it in your network. I think that was it for me. And one last thing, just one quick last thing is if you jump over to organization and firmware upgrades, I'll just mention this because it just dropped this week. So first be aware that, I gotta click it to actually move to that page. Be aware that 31171 just recently dropped because there was a hot fix. So that was just released on June 10th. But also, if you click on the beta tab, you'll notice that 32.1.2 has now dropped. And it was, I think, just 2 or 3 days ago. In addition to a couple of fixes, there is a new feature that we so far have just called local firmware fetch, for lack of a better name. So when doing firmware upgrades, not every single AP in your network, especially if you have hundreds of APs in a network, they don't all need to download the new firmware image individually. Roughly 5% of your APs will automatically be selected as quote unquote server APs, for lack of a better name, and will handle local distribution of the firmware to the other 95% of the APs in your network. So don't necessarily have to jump into details here, but there is a documentation article that was just published, just put out there this week, that describes this local firmware fetch. Just wanted to call that to your attention as something new. This is the actual documentation article that was just put out a couple days ago, or just made live yesterday, perhaps.
Perfect.
All right.
Excellent.
I think we're going to wrap here. I think we're out of time. But
Yeah.
I did want to follow up quick on that question, Al, that we were talking about. There's a question that came in about Wi-Fi 7 and WPA3 recommendations. Ultimately, I think that's probably a topic for another show. But also, I would, in the meantime, encourage you to reach out to your Cisco account team, and they'll be able to get a hold of us or a wireless expert to help address those questions or those concerns around that topic. But thank you very much, Dave. This was great. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks. Thanks for having me again. Is there a place where we'll, I think we had one question in the parking lot still. We'll follow up on that, maybe on the YouTube channel.
Yeah, they were addressed in the Slido. Like we did have some people addressing the question
great.
In the Slido as well. So, yep.
Great. Just wanted to make sure we didn't leave one in the parking lot.
Yep. Yeah, thanks. Appreciate that. So with that, I just want to thank you again and encourage you to subscribe to the YouTube channel, Get Unplugged, or I'm sorry, it's youtube.com/@Get Unplugged. But if you do need to get a hold of us and you want to give us feedback, questions, other things, you can email us at getunplugged@cisco.com. You can DM us on Twitter X at Unplugged80211 or on Threads Unplugged Connectivity. So thank you, Dave. Appreciate your time. Thanks, Al. Appreciate you as
Yeah,
always
good to see
here
you.
being here. It's a great episode. And until next time, stay connected and unplugged.